Hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, but not enough.
Yes.
A bit stronger would be better.
I
Better, it's
so
better.
I will start with as you wished, Thierry, a small historical presentation, but I would like also to switch to the present time and to try to answer your questions. The origin of the G7 was really aimed to create an informal get-together of a small number of leaders. And at that time, the issues were mostly about the international economy, oil prices and oil shock, and also monetary conditions and coordination of monetary policies. The scope of the G7 meetings has been very much extended and quickly enough extended to foreign policy and security policy, but also more recently to global affairs. Now, today, the G7 has a lowered legitimacy in terms of what it represents in the world. At the beginning, it was more than 60% of the GDP in the world. Now it's maybe something like 40. At the beginning, it was 20% of the global population. Now it is 10%. And also the other big difference is that the world has really very much changed in terms of international governance. The international governance as a whole is in a disarray, is in a difficult condition. And of the crisis, of course, which occurred recently, we have got the G20. It is interesting to note that just before the G20, in the years leading to the G20, we had a number of attempts, like the so-called Heiligendamm process, to associate to the G7 the most important emerging countries. And then we had the G20 created in the conditions everybody knows. So now we see the G7, which regularly practices what we call the outreach. Even if we have the G20, the G7 is inviting regularly leaders from other countries. And I will try to use here my experience as a G7 and G20 Sherpa, which I was in 3 years, 2017, 2018, 2019, to contribute to your debate with a small reflection of what makes today the legitimacy and the efficiency of a G7. I think what remains from the beginning is the informality of the meetings between the leaders. In Biarritz in 2019, our president said, I was his Sherpa, he said to me, I don't want to spend my time on negotiating long conclusions. I want a really, like it was meant at the beginning, a really private discussion between the leaders. And it is what happened. If you see the conclusions from 2019, they are very, very, very short, very different from usual conclusions. The second important thing to be able to be efficient is the unity. To have leaders who are able, having similar goals, representing countries which share basic features and values, to agree on what they want to achieve. But I would say immediately after that another condition, and it might seem a bit contradictory, but it is not, it is complementary, is being able of a strong unity, still not being in a bloc, in a situation of building a bloc against another bloc of countries. And this is the reason why what we call the outreach, which is probably not enough today, is really important. And here again, I will give the example of what we did in Biarritz. We did not only invite countries, not non-members of the G7, to take part to an informal discussion, but we also made it possible for them to prepare the meetings with them. So they have had their own Sherpas, and we have had sectoral conclusions in different sessions with those countries. One important case for us was Africa. We had a session devoted to Africa with a special outreach for African countries. And I think it is a very important case, even if Africa is now represented in the G20, even through the African Union. And the last thing I want to add is, for the efficiency and the legitimacy of the G7, is to get concrete results. I will take the examples of the last two summits. I will mention the Hiroshima Principles on artificial intelligence, which is a very important result, which is one of the building blocks on which the international community is trying to build a common view on how to see the development of artificial intelligence. And more recently, we had a very important decision on the 7 countries to support Ukraine, with a concrete decision on financial support. But again, if you look at the big topics covered by the G7 and the G20, you see a lot of commonalities. You see the global subjects. You see, including climate and biodiversity. You see food security. You see the fight against inequalities. You see, as I said, artificial intelligence and the digital developments, and how to avoid a divide in the world in those new technologies, in the capacity to use those new technologies. So my conclusion here, and I will be happy to take part to the debate, for the way forward, is that the G7 needs to keep this informality, this possibility to have a common deliberation of leaders on the most important problems of the time, but also to be able, through working with other countries, and I leave open the different possibilities. You mentioned enlargement, for instance, of the G7, or different kinds of outreach or better outreach, the capacity to contributing to the global discussion and to bringing their own solutions to the global discussion.
Thank you very much.